Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today we're beginning the top 100 games of all time as of 2024. We're going to go ahead and dive into these shortly. I'll be starting with 10 today. We're going to be going from 100 down to 91. This, as usual, is the yearly series I do at the end of every single year, recounting kind of my top 100 games as of this current point in time. We'll have timestamps down below, so you can go ahead and jump to whatever particular segment you want, but let's go ahead and dive into a few usual precursors, things to get out of the way before we start the video. Number one, I am running a member support drive. If you are a member on Patreon or Ko-Fi, or more importantly, if you want to become a member and support the channel, if you appreciate the content I put out throughout the year, the hundreds and hundreds of videos that go up on a regular basis, there is a member support drive right now where there's a bunch of games being given away. I'll link to the other video down below, but basically, I'm giving away a lot of games. Although I do hope that if you are becoming a member or whatnot, ideally it's because you're appreciating the channel, mainly because I can't guarantee everyone wins, so if you're doing it for that reason, then everyone's a winner. If you're doing it just to win games, I still appreciate it, and maybe you'll win, maybe not, but I'll link to that other video down below. Past that, the usual notes around this list series, and just some things you should know before we dive into it, to get them out of the way, to set expectations, things about what this video is, how I look at it, how I rank the games, all of that. Let's go ahead and dive into the general specifics of how I put together my top 100 every single year. And to that end, the first thing I do is I keep a little board of all my rankings, of all the rankings of my 5s, my 4.5s, 4s, etc., down and onwards and all that, and I keep a board ranking all those numbers. What I do before my top 100 is I D-rank everything. I completely and totally D-rank every single game, and then re-rank them based on where I think they should be right now. The idea there being, I don't want to mentally be, well, that game was a 5, so it should be a 5. Rather, I want to reaffirm to myself, this is a 5, this is a 4.5, based on my current thoughts around the games right now, because rankings and opinions do change with time. So I want as much of a blank slate as possible, and granted, most of the games will end up the same ratings they were, but in case time has shifted different opinions up or down, this lets me walk in with less of a preconceived bias as to what I thought that game should be. When I'm done with that, I use PubMeeple as a ranking engine to go ahead and rank every single game against each other within those categories. So I rank the 5s against the 5s, the 4.5s against the 4.5s, in order to get a total list and a ranking of my top 100 games of all time, which for the record has around 60 5s at the higher, so around 1 through 60 are going to be 5 out of 5s, and then around 60 through 100 are going to be 4.5s out of 5s as far as my rankings, which means anything that's a 4 or lower didn't make its way into the top 100, and half of my 4.5s, more than half of my 4.5s, are not in the top 100 games. The last thing I do is I take a look around my general shelves, as well as my list from last year, just to make sure I didn't accidentally miss anything that should be included. That's an important step because already this year I found one thing that I missed that I completely forgot about, that for some reason wasn't on the list. That kind of oversight can happen, so I try to do that kind of double check just to make sure I find everything, and there we have our top 100 games. As far as the way I look at this list video, as far as the criteria I have, because I have gotten into this before in the past, this to me is not the top 100 games of all time. This is my top 100 games based on my thoughts right now. Thoughts and opinions change. Games that I spend too much time with, that I may no longer be as immersed with, those can shift away. Games that I possibly have given lots of, hundreds of hours to, that should get some sort of praise just for the fact that it gives you hundreds of hours of gameplay, that's not what this ranking is. This ranking is my desire to play these games as of the point in time right now, which generally means that you usually don't see a lot of movement in my top 100 in the top 50. Those are a lot more stable year to year. They might shift position to position, but they usually are more stable as far as where they are. Things do move in and out, but they're more stable the higher up the rankings you get, versus my second half, that 50 to 100, that's where you see a lot more fluctuation. This year, I haven't done the full number so far, but there are around 20 to 25 games or so that have left my top 100 from last year. Most of those are going to be from that second half of the list, but we'll get to all of that in a top 100 analytics breakdown kind of video that I like to do every year, where I take a look and talk about, the biggest changes, the biggest movements, games that were added, games that left. I do all of that in a full recap video. But with that, we're going to go ahead and dive into this top 100, starting with number 100. Number 100 is going to be one that was in my top 100 last year. It has dropped down a few spots, but mainly because I haven't played it recently. I think as soon as I dive back into it, it would probably reaffirm it. Again, just because a game Many games in my top 100 may not have even been played in the last year, and they still maintain the position. But a lack of playing things does allow me to forget just how much I enjoyed it, and things that are more recent that gave me that little boost are likely to bump up spots in the top 100. But number 100 is going to be from Steamforged Games, and that's going to be Resident Evil, the board game. Resident Evil, the board game, is specifically the third game they've put out. It's the first one in the series in theory. It's Resident Evil, then Resident Evil 2, then 3. But the way Steamforged Games put them out, they did 2, then 3, then 1. That's Resident Evil, the board game. This builds off of everything 3 did well, giving you a tense dungeon crawling game in which you're going to be working with limited, well, everything. Limited resource, limited strength. You are trying to fight down a bunch of zombies that you don't have enough bullets to deal with reliably or quickly enough or efficiently enough, which means you are going to be running and closing doors behind you as often as you are going to be landing that headshot. Trying to find ammo, trying to find better weapons, all that's going to be incredibly important in this game, but the specific thing that Resident Evil the board game did, iterating on 3, is the fact that you have these predetermined maps that you don't know what they're going to look like until you start exploring them. As you explore different things, as you open doorways, new sections of the map are going to be laid out in a predetermined pattern. This is not random in terms of a random dungeon crawler, rather you flip over a card and you see what's in that room, what's going to spawn, how the map's going to loop back on itself, if it does at all, or how you're going to progress forward. That sense of the unknown, as every single door you walk through, you don't know exactly how this is going to play out for or against you. You can't just look down at the board and say, well, I'm going to try to circle back that way. You have no idea what's going to happen until you start wandering, which gives that extra level of dread that works well off of what Resident Evil the board game already does. This to me is a dungeon crawler built on theme and tension and horror above everything else, while still maintaining the traditional dungeon crawler things you'll like, such as increased good weapons or gear or other things like that, survivability, working with your teammates, and just that general cooperative dread, playing it solo or cooperatively as you go through Resident Evil the board game. Coming in at number 99, we have 20 Strong, a smaller game over here from Chip Theory Games. Now, this is a solo game that you could play it multiplayer if you want, if you just like controlling the same stuff together, but this is primarily designed as a solo game. In 20 Strong, you have 20 Strong Warriors. You have this core set over here with Solo Sentinels, which is my favorite of the initial decks. Tanglewoods is also pretty strong. I've played Tanglewoods Red so far. That's not out yet, but that's their newer sets. They also have Cloudspire. They've announced Nemesis. 20 Strong basically gives you 20 dice, your 20 Strong Warriors, that you're going to be rolling as you go through a series of progressive challenges until you eventually take down the boss. The problem is you're trying to make sure you can run on this limited currency. These warriors, you're going to be exerting them every single time you tackle a beast. But then every round you get to refresh a little bit. And it's up to you to try to upgrade your stats or find those extra little abilities you can turn in, either one-time use or ongoing, that will keep you pacing a little bit ahead of the enemies you're fighting. Because if you don't manage the way you upgrade, if you aren't on top of things, you will find yourself playing a losing battle, losing more and more forces each round, and not having enough to take down that final boss. Versus if you are able to go ahead and know where to push your luck, know where to mitigate, know where to use abilities, then you'll be able to make sure to keep a fresh, strong fighting force that will be essential to taking down that final boss. 20 Strong is an excellent solo challenge, playable in 30-ish minutes or so, maybe 30, well, I guess depends on which game you're playing. It could be 30 all the way up to an hour, but it gives you a very strong strategic puzzle at a reasonable enough price point. This is Chip Theory's entry into a lower budget sphere and whatnot, and they did a great job with it. If you like solo little puzzles, 20 Strong is one you should definitely check out. Coming in at number 98, we have City of Spies Estoril from Meebo Games. City of Spies is one that I haven't tabled recently, and I do want to get it back to the table because it has historically been a great game in my collection. It's a game that gives you the tension of trying to decide what's most important to you, and where are you going to play your hand, where are you going to show other players what you're going for, versus where are you going for more subtle plays. The general idea is across 4 rounds of play, you're trying to earn the various spies in the game, and you're trying to do that by placing your starting spies onto the board to earn more spies. More spies are worth more points, and they also give you more abilities, which are going to be incredibly helpful as you try to gather even more spies. Now, you're trying to get the spies because they have points on them, but you're also trying to fulfill certain objectives in the game as well, because you are only able to hold a limited pool of spies. But the abilities on the spies are going to be everything. Whether you're assassinating other spies, whether you're romanticizing them to other areas of the board, whether you're looking at other areas face down, whatever it is you're doing, you're utilizing the the board abilities as well as the spy abilities in order to figure out how you're going to get what you want. There's a little bit of subterfuge as you place things down to tempt others to fight you in areas you may not be intending to be fighting. There's the knowledge of trying to figure out when you're playing things face down or face up depending on the region and which battles are more advantageous for you. And then there's the knowledge of the various spies at others' disposals. I find it to be a great game at 3 players, a good game at 4 players, best at 3, but one that gives you a lot of things to consider and a lot of getting in each other's heads and trying to be one up on the other person as you play. City of Spies, fantastic game. Not one of those most well-known ones, but one that I always recommend as not necessarily a hidden gem, but definitely a gem and a little more hidden than other games. Coming in at 97, we have Massive Darkness Hellscape. This is a box I'm not going to turn on its side because there's a whole bunch of loose miniatures in here, but Massive Darkness Hellscape from CMON. This is the Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape, iterating upon the original Massive Darkness with much better gameplay, streamlining the original rules, as well as giving you asymmetric characters that totally change up the way you play the game. You see, at its core, this is a dungeon crawler. A dungeon crawler where you're going to be controlling a bunch of characters, all with various different abilities or asymmetric approaches to the game. Whether you're playing a bag builder or a push your luck engine, or you're playing as a little paladin with these little auras you're casting around the board, every character in the game, from the necromancers to the paladins to the monks, they all have their own little mini game that they are playing as far as how that character class operates. Combine that with different characters within that character class that give you a further unique ability, and you have basically a dungeon crawler where you're going through these series of progressive dungeons, either in single shot scenarios or in linked campaigns, as you try to take on the various hordes that are populating the dungeon, because there are going to be a lot of hordes that you are trying to take out, and then take down the various the roaming monsters, the bosses, all of that in this game that again gives you single shot and campaign gameplay. The game at its core is going to be rolling lots of dice, having fun rolling lots of dice, finding more abilities and things to do that let you roll dice, but this is like a classic dungeon crawler in the best sense of it, as far as giving you loot and abilities and upgrades and progression and all of those things, and doing so without zombies in case zombies aren't your jam, that other thing that CMON is very famous for. So Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape, an excellent game that did a lot better than the original game as far as building on a solid foundation and bringing you a better dungeon crawler to your table. Coming in at 96, we have Welcome to the Moon. Welcome to the Moon is the better version of Welcome 2 in my opinion, although I do think Welcome 2 has a certain accessibility that Welcome to the Moon might feel a bit more intimidating because there's 8 maps in this game, and I also think the first map, while being a good intro to the game, is not necessarily the best showing of the game. Honestly, maps 2 and I think 3 is it? Let me see. Maps 2 is excellent, I love 2. 3 is a lot of fun as well. 5 is pretty fun, 6 pretty fun. There's a lot of different maps. There's 8 different maps in this game. I happen to think 1 and 8 are the worst ones, the sandwich of those two, the opener and the closer. But Welcome to the Moon is a flip and write game. You're going to be flipping cards in the game in order to write down numbers onto various rows of the sheet in order to fulfill a bunch of objectives. That's something that's going to be very similar to the original game, Welcome 2, where you are filling out these blocks and putting down fences and planting trees and pools, and you're trying to figure out the best combination of how you can assemble all of that into the best point scoring engine from all the other players. Well, Welcome to the Moon exceeds that, is in addition to the fact that they give you this kind of campaign gameplay if you're into that. That's honestly not where I'd recommend you start. I'd recommend you literally just grab a map and start going through it. 1 is a good intro point. It's not the most satisfying, but there's 8 different maps that all rely on the same core concept as Welcome 2. We're going to be flipping cards, using the ability on one card and the number of another card to combine across different maps different things that you are doing. Each map has its subtleties, each map has its nuances, and each map gives you different things to think about, which means you basically get 8 games for the price of 1, or 1.3 or something like that. It's a little more expensive than Welcome 2, so it's definitely like, if you want the cheapest and most accessible game, check out Welcome 2. If you want the game that I think does a lot more at a reasonable price point with a lot of variety, Welcome to the Moon is the flip and write I'm going to recommend. Coming in at 94, we're going to have another small box game, which is going to be Faraway from Pandasaurus. This is one that's new to the list, and in fact, I think this is the first one that is new to this list this year. Everything else, I'm pretty sure, I'll do this in the stats later, but I'm pretty sure the rest of these have all been in my top 100. Faraway is the first game at 94 coming in that is new to the list, and honestly, I think it's the only one in this particular batch of top 10. Faraway from Pandasaurus is a very accessible point scoring optimization game that plays in around 20 minutes, that works well at a variety of player counts as you ultimately are trying to draft various cards. All you're trying to do is basically create a pathway of 8 cards. You see, you're going to be laying out cards each round. Players are going to start with cards in their hand, or you can do a draft, which I recommend once you know the game, and that's going to be a starting hand, and then you play a card that's going to go into your pathway, but also define what speed you're getting the next card at. So if you play lower numbers, you're going to have first access to the next batch of cards. But then higher numbers often have more things going for you, versus higher numbers, lower numbers to higher numbers create a chain that will give you extra bonuses. Now you're trying to basically get these cards over here. You're placing a card, taking a new card, placing a card, taking a new card, rinse and repeat 8 times until you've played 8 cards in your journey path. At that point, you flip over all the cards and you start scoring them in reverse order. You've gone on your journey, and now it's time to come back. As you come back on the journey, you score based on what that card sees. So your 8th card might score based on how many yellow cards you have. It might be a yellow card itself. It'll give you 2 points because it's the only yellow card. If you flip over the next card, that card might say, well, you get 3 points for every night card. And if that card and the 8th card are both night cards, boom, you get 6 points. If only one of those cards is a night card, you get 3 points. So effectively, you're not scoring based on your whole tableau. Rather, as you reveal the cards in reverse order that you play them, you're going to score for what the cards have seen on that journey already, which gives you an interesting way to think through how you're collecting and playing cards and how you're structuring the order and scoring that you're going to get. It does all of that strategy in 20 minutes in a game that teaches very well and genuinely plays great at 2 players, as well as playing great all the way up to 6 players. This is an excellent, rewarding, strategic filler game that I probably have like 40 plays under my belt at this point, and I'm not quite bored yet. Moving on over here to my number 93. Number 93 is another small box one, which is going to be Circled Wagons. Circled Wagons, another game that is not new to this list, as I said this already. The rest of these have already been in my top 100 many times. Circled Wagons, so afraid that I need a new little wallet for this. This whole thing's completely coming apart. But the good news is they actually have a new Circled Wagons that will be coming out with a box set if you want it, or just more sleeves, giving you a new version and the old version, and combinable as well if you want. But the general idea of this is kind of a rondel. It's basically open drafting. You're going to be placing out cards into a little circle and then creating a drafting pool where players can gather cards, place them down into their board, trying to be mindful of how the cards are going to connect and overlay other cards in order to create different scoring patterns, both for the inherent value of terrains. Each terrain type, you can see different terrain types over here. So this grouping of 3 grays, that's great. That's already going to be 3 points if it's your largest grouping of grays. And you can add more grays that will touch it, adding further to your point values. So for each of the 6 terrains, getting large scoring groups of terrains are going to be worth points, but you'll notice there's also lots of symbols on those cards because you're going to have different scoring cards in each game that will force you to consider what you're trying to do. Are you trying to have rows and columns of wagons? Are you trying to have pickaxes next to mines? What different criteria are you trying to fulfill based on the 3 varied scoring cards? Now this is a 2-player game. You're basically just playing this as a 2-player engine as you try to open draft the various cards, but whenever you take a card, any card you skip go to your opponent. So you have to weigh up the value of taking the card that is directly available versus bypassing for a better card but giving your opponent free cards to add to their pool. There's a lot to consider in this game. The scoring criteria are always variable every time you play it, which gives it a different feel every time you dive into the game. I'm excited about the new content that'll be coming, but this one has already done its job, giving me an absolute ton of satisfying 2-player gameplay. Yes, there's a solo mode. No, I still have not played it for this particular game, but it's an excellent game. Circle the Wagons from Button Shy Games. Coming in at 92, we have another small box game, which is Monikers. Monikers is one of a handful of party games that made their way into my top 100, by far not the best one, but definitely one that I constantly enjoy whenever I table it. Monikers at its core is charades, I guess. Not really. It's 3-step charades. I guess there's no simple at its core. Monikers is a game that's known by many names, anything from Time's Up to what are the other ones? Pretzel Bowl, I think, or Fish Bowl is one of them. There's a bunch of games, both open domain as well as other licensed games, that generally do the gameplay that Monikers does, but Monikers is my favorite, most accessible version of it. I have like 4 small boxes of all the various cards, but basically, you're going to create teams of players in the game. Then each player in the game is going to choose a bunch of cards that are going to be in that game. So I might choose Abraham Lincoln and a washing machine, or the brick that's tumbling in the washing machine on a trampoline. There's all kinds of things, anything from simple concepts to bizarre internet phrases and memes that will go on these cards. Then when it's your turn, you have 60 seconds, or I guess depending on, I think it's 6 seconds, I'm pretty sure it's 6 seconds, but whatever time you use, as long as you're consistent, you're going to talk to your team, having one person being the clue giver that gets to say whatever they want. So I could say, this was a president who was shot in a theater, and someone on my team shouts, Abraham Lincoln. Boom, the card goes down, we get those points, and you go round and round until all the cards are used up, divvy up the points, see which team got the most points, and that's a decent game. Nothing crazy to it. If you've played Taboo, you've played games like it, there are many, many games that do that. But then you go to round 2, and in round 2, it's the same concept, but now you only have one word. So those 40 to 60 cards that are in play at this point in round 2, they've all gone through, and now when it's your turn, you sit there and say, assassinated, and someone says Abraham Lincoln. You only have one ward, and in this moment right here and now, it's easy because you only have that one ward I've been talking about, but when you've just gone through 40 to 60 cards, having assassinated correlate to Abraham Lincoln might happen. There might be 3 other cards that correlate to assassinated, and it results in this fun little puzzle of I only have one ward that I can give as the clue giver to a concept that the entire group has been introduced to, and you're trying to recollect points in round 2. And in round 3, you're doing the exact same thing, but now this time it's with charades, and so suddenly I stand up and I'm like, and suddenly it's charades, and hopefully you got my top hat and assassination, or any version of it that I choose to utilize for that card that is now in play. So again, it's say what you want, one word, and charades, going through 3 sequences. There's house rules and other things you can do for 4th rounds. Honestly, I recommend the base 3. But Monikers is a fascinating, delightful party game that works excellently with groups of 6 and more players. It is playable at 4. I think it's actually technically playable. No, I was going to say it's playable at 3. It's not. It's playable at 4. But I think 4 is a good experience. I think 6+ is really where Moniker shines. From there, I think I may have skipped one over here. No, I did one out of order. This is a problem. Monikers is technically my number 92. I skipped my 93, so look at the timestamps and reverse them. My 93 is Kemet over here. I missed this big box. 93 is Kemet, 92 is Monikers. We're going to come back to Kemet over here. Kemet Blood and Sand is my number 93 game. 92 being Monikers. Kemet is one that for a long time was in my original top 20 games of all time. Kemet, Cyclades, and Inish were all in my top 20, and they've all maintained their position in my top 100, but they have shifted around from there. Kemet in particular is one that I think got a little bit replaced by Blood Rage as the most violent area control game that I have that's just simply all about the powers and abilities as you try to combine them to create your unique set of powers and abilities and how those are going to interact with the other players at the table. Kemet is still very much in my top 100. It has dipped a little bit over time, but I will say the new Kemet Rise of the Gods, oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but the new Gods expansion over there, introducing 2 new full sets of power tiles, bringing the total power tiles at this point up to, I believe, 7 unique sets of power tiles. Kemet is just a game that gives you tons of powers and abilities that players are ultimately trying to acquire as they build up their forces and try to take down their opponents by managing their defense, their offense, and their currency across these 7 different, and their economy, their defense, and their offense, across these 7 different lines of power tiles, of which not all of which are going to be available in every single game. Depending on the player count, you'll have a different number of power tile sets available, which forces the players to try to fight over those limited power tiles to get the ones that they think are the most beneficial. Because while there are duplicates at times, for the most part, especially with the best ones, there aren't duplicated. And so you're trying to look there and say, well, I really want that level 4 white tile because it's going to give me a divine power card every single night. It's also going to give me this creature, this monster that I can link with my forces to take you down. It is an incredible area control experience that just lets you break the rules as fast as you're learning those rules. The sheer amount of powers and abilities and the open tableau of how players are trying to plan their unique approach to gaining the right combination of powers and abilities while they are actively trying to gain the victory points they need in order to win. Kemet Blood and Sand is the revised edition of Kemet, giving you an excellent experience with just tons and tons of powers and abilities, a little bit more balance, some changes to the rules that I think were good changes that kept the game a bit more, not necessarily streamlined, but stopping things like late last player advantage, things like that in the game. I think Kemet is always a great experience that's just going to give you just powers and abilities. This is powers and abilities, the area control game. That's what Kemet Blood and Sand is, and that is why it's still here as my number 93. My number 92 is Monikers. My number 91 is the last one on this set of top 100, and my number 91 is Machina Arcana. Machina Arcana is one of those less well-known games. It has an audience, make no mistake, but compared to games like Kemet or Massive Darkness, this hasn't seen that level of critical knowledge, knowingness, awareness, whatever you want to call it. Machina Arcana is a dungeon crawler with a Cthulhu theme over here, a very Cthulhu mythos theme, and it's basically a game that's going to have you, well, trying to navigate this sprawling adventure of dungeon-ish, kind of. You see, it's not really a dungeon in a typical sense. Rather, you have these set of scenarios you're going through, and you have these tiles that are going to slowly disappear as you traverse the tiles. You see, you're constantly maintaining this 2x2 grid, and that might sound like a lot, but each tile is like a big tile over here. And as you move, you're kind of navigating this dungeon, having monsters drop off, having new monsters approach you, all while you try to accomplish the various goals in this cooperative scenario of dread. If you're talking about the dread in the sense of terror you have in Resident Evil, the board game, you have that in Machina Arcana as well. well. It's got incredible board presence, incredible production, incredible art, incredible theme, and an incredible level of the kinds of things you're going to find. It's like the steampunk Lovecraftian universe where you're going to find various gear that will completely break the game in your favor. Things that will help you levitate across gaps, move through walls, various weapons that will help you get an edge up over the enemy. But at its core, you always have to remember that the enemy is dangerous, the enemy is scary, and just like in Resident Evil the board game, you will want to run as often as you fight, and you have to know when you actually have time to deal with that workbench and find new things versus when it's in your best interest to simply light a fire underneath the entire board and wander off to the next map tile, dropping off the various enemies along the way. It's a delightful experience that if you in any way like Lovecraft or steampunk or dungeon crawlers, this should be one that's on your radar. It's an incredible experience and not as well known as many of the other dungeon crawlers out there. That is my top 100 games, 100 through 91 over here. We are here with this first batch of 10. And what I didn't say in the opening that I should have said is we'll be doing a video a day mostly. There might be a break at some point, but we'll mostly be doing a video a day until this ends. Until this top 100 series ends, we'll just be doing one a day for the next 10 days, possibly with one gap. I might do one gap. We'll see how that goes. But that's it. That is your first of 10 videos in the series. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you are interested in supporting the channel for games given away or just because you appreciate the content, I'll link to that video down below as well. And until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.